Some stories are funny, some are disturbing, and some go beyond the rabbit hole. Let's begin.
Story 1. I was tucking in my 2-year-old. He said, "Goodbye, Dad." I said, "No, we say goodnight." He replied, "I know, but this time it's goodbye." I had to check on him a few times to make sure he was still there. Story 2. While changing my daughter in front of the open closet door, she kept looking around me and laughing. I asked her what was so funny. She said, "The man." I replied, "What man?" She pointed at the closet and said, "The man with the snake neck." I turned around, nothing was there. I'm afraid to look into the history of my house to see if anyone ever hung themselves in that closet. At least she wasn't scared. Story 3. "Daddy, sleep," she said, then pushed my head underwater at the pool. Story 4. "Why are you crying?" "Bad man." "What bad man?" "There." She pointed behind me at a dark corner of the room. The lamp on the bookshelf next to that dark corner fell off the moment I turned to look. Story 5. When my son was about 3, he used to crawl in a strange way, sliding his forehead along the floor. That was creepy enough. One night, he crawled down the hallway into my room like that, stood a few inches from my face, and made a weird meowing sound. Then he climbed into bed and went to sleep. Another time, he was terrified of a monster in the basement. We went down together and, of course, saw nothing. As I turned off the light and headed upstairs, he said, "He's right behind us now." I might have peed a little. But the creepiest moment was when I scolded him for misbehaving. He hid under his blanket. I joked, "Where is my little Carson?" He slowly lowered the blanket, stared at me with a dead, evil expression, and said, "Carson is gone. I am Rick." We never knew any Ricks. Still don't. Story 6. One night, while getting my 2.5-year-old daughter out of the bath, my wife and I explained how important it was to keep her private parts clean. She casually replied, "Oh, nobody touches me there. They tried one night. They kicked the door in and tried, but I fought back. I died, and now I'm here." She said it like it was nothing. Story 7. When my daughter was about 2.5, we were driving under an overpass where several people had jumped to commit suicide. In the most innocent voice, she said, "They're all dead." There was no way she knew anything about that place. She was still facing backwards in her car seat. I asked her to repeat what she said. She didn't. Story 8. My youngest was a toddler. Giving her a bath was like trying to baptize a rabid cat. One night, around age 3, she said, "I'm scared of the water. It's how I died before." Story 9. My oldest daughter, about 2.5 at the time, said she kept seeing an old man in our apartment. We assumed it was her imagination. One day, we were looking at photos of my dad who had passed away a few months earlier. She pointed and said, "Oh, that's the old man." She had no idea what he looked like. Story 10.
Before we move further, if you're still watching, you're already too deep. Subscribe and leave a like.
I was playing with my 3-year-old daughter when she suddenly stopped and looked at me. She said, "We were sisters. I died and God made me wait until we could be back together again." Then she went right back to playing. I'm her dad. Story 11. When my daughter was about 4 or 5, she said, "Before this, I had a mommy who didn't take care of me, so God took me away from her and gave me to you and Daddy." We're not religious, and she wasn't adopted. Story 12. I went to check on my 5-year-old while she was asleep. She rolled onto her back and said, "I must not eat humans. Humans aren't food," then rolled over again. Story 13. In the middle of the night, my 2.5-year-old climbed out of her bed, something we didn't know she could do. I woke up to her standing beside our bed, just staring at me. She said, "I'll miss you when you die," then went back to sleep. Story 14. My kid once said he was going to fork me. It sounded a lot like the other F word. I was concerned until I saw the fork in his hand. He just wanted to stab me. Story 15. My father died when I was 15. 20 years later, my 3-year-old daughter was tucking me into bed. She interrupted me and said, "I knew your daddy before I was born." Then she went straight to sleep. Story 16. When my son was about 4, I was driving in an older part of the city while waiting for my mother to finish a doctor's appointment. We passed an old 1960s apartment complex. He got excited and said, "That's Aunt Judy's house. It used to be pink. Can we go see Aunt Judy?" He never been there, and Aunt Judy lived in another state, in a house, not an apartment. I called her later that night laughing about it. She asked me for the street names. When I told her, she went quiet. That was the first apartment she ever lived in back in 1965, and yes, it used to be painted flamingo pink. Story 17. When our son was almost 3, we asked him if he had looked down from heaven and picked us as his parents. He said, "I wasn't in heaven, I was in the graveyard." Story 18. I once babysat a little girl who talked about her big brother. She was an only child. Later, I found out her parents had a miscarriage before she was born. Story 19. My toddler used to say hi to everything. Hi, 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 hi. One day, it sounded more like die, die, die. I asked, "What are you saying?" She turned, looked at me, and whispered, "Die." Story 20. When I was 4, Mr. Rand used to visit my room several times a week. He told me stories about how he was killed in World War II. Eventually, he stopped showing up. Years later, my 5-year-old son walked into my room late at night and said there was a man in his room. I rushed in, no one was there. Then he said, "Mr. Rand said you can't see him anymore, but he's okay."